everyone. Welcome to the Keep It Real show with Adi Mopidevi. I have a distinguished speaker yet again with us, Frederick Donatucci. He was a former VP with Indy. I would love to bring Frederick to all of us. In my previous discussions with him, I got a chance to understand how deep his knowledge has been in various large-scale IT transformations. I'm really excited to bring Frederick to all of us. Frederick, welcome to the Keep It Real show. How are you doing?
Yeah, thanks for having me here. I appreciate it. Doing great.
All right, great. Frederick, for the benefit of our audience, would you give us a quick summary of your career?
Sure.
Mhm.
So, hello, my name is Fred Donatucci. I have over 20 years of technology experience and leadership. I had the privilege of most recently leading technology at New Indy Container Board. My
Mhm.
journey with that company began in August 2020 when I assumed the role of Vice President of IT, the first one to lead that area. In 2022, our contributions there were actually honored with the prestigious SoCal Orby Award. It was a testament of a lot of the work we did at New
Okay.
Indy. But prior to working there, I worked at key roles in Fortune 500 companies and mid-sized companies, including Honeywell,
Okay.
Mattel, Avery
Mhm.
Dennison, and consulting for some.
Oh, wow. What I really like in our previous conversations, what I really want our audience to hear about is I feel that you're a very people person. You love to mentor and you love to build conscious relationships. So I would like to start off our discussion with that. So tell us about what are the things you've learned from great people whom you have worked with and how that left an important mark on you and in your career. Let's start with that.
Sure. And this was always a hard one because there's so many people that I have really been blessed to work
Hmm.
with. Actually, I was at an event last night and we were talking, I was on a bunch of CIOs and they were all talking about how much a great leadership and those kind of impacts really make on our leadership style as we go through our path. But I think the two things that come to mind that really stuck with me as I was going through it was when I was back with Hitachi Consulting, I was doing a lot of SAP consulting and project management. I was on one of my
Hmm.
larger projects at the time. And I was talking to the senior manager. We had a couple of things going wrong, and I was trying to figure out how to get this done. And some things were in the middle, which was this cross-functional. And
Yeah.
he told me, he said, "Hey, when you're getting this thing done, the one thing you have to remember really is that you are the safety net." And for
Hmm.
me, I think about that for a second. But he really is saying that when you're this leader, when you're in charge of this, everyone's going to do their job. But your goal is to make sure that if any problems
Yes.
happen, issues happen, whatever, that you're there to catch that and to make sure
Hmm.
that you can resolve those issues. So that really set my priorities when I started leading things. To remember that I want to enable people. I want people to do
Hmm.
the best they can, but I also want to be there to be their safety net when they have those problems. The second thing
Absolutely.
that really came to my mind was at Avery Dennison, and I had a great vice president there, Randy. We had a good relationship, and I was talking to him, and I was venting about some things that were going on, my team and leadership.
Hmm.
And one of the things he said to me that was profound, he goes, "What do you want me to do with this information?" So for me, that made me think about when I have time to talk to my manager or talk to a leader, how do I frame things that it's important to them? And if there's something I want to share with them, that it's really asking for an action, asking for a specific help. There's tons of things I can think about that really formed some real great leadership with me. But those two things
Hmm.
stuck in the back of my head to help me frame and communicate better with the leaders I work with.
Thank you for sharing that. And the reason I asked that question, Frederick, is that when you look across the various transformation cycles and IT industry experiences, the leader who's probably at the forefront of doing that for the organization, they really carry the baton, they set the tone for the whole transformation and how it is communicated both to leadership and to your team as well.
Yeah,
So I'm sure in your long illustrious career, you would have seen IT transformation, you would have seen cloud transformations, and the latest is the AI transformation, what's happening.
exactly.
What are the common trends you've seen across all of these, and how do you think IT leaders should actually look up to these transformations now?
Yeah, and that's a great question because every time we see these new things come out, we think
Hmm.
it's a whole new scenario.
Hmm.
But when you look at any kind of these business transformations, it's just the tool and how well the tool can achieve your business
Yeah.
goals or capabilities. So I think the common things is you're still looking for the use case, right? Yes. I heard one person recently, another CIO I was talking to, said if you frame everything in types of
Hmm.
your technical business initiatives instead of what the capabilities you're giving people, you're
Hmm.
missing a great opportunity to really bring people on board.
Yes, I agree.
So I think if you're looking at any of these things, the cloud, you're looking at AI, you're looking at any kind of business and transformation, even
Hmm.
emergent acquisitions. Why are we doing this? What are we trying
Yes.
to achieve? I think that's the underlying thing that does it. And the other thing is just now you have the technology. What can the technology do? I
Hmm.
think when you talk about AI, and I've had this conversation recently with a lot of other leaders, is it just gives you more capabilities. It gives you different ways of achieving things quicker than you had in the past. Because if you look at it, you went through data, you went through ERP transformations, and you went
Cloud.
through, yeah, cloud, and then you had all the robotics and the
Hmm.
automation there. And now AI takes all that stuff to another level to say, how do I make it easier for you to pull information, get answers, and do things? But at the underlying, it is a structure of why am I doing this? What benefit is going to have for the
Yes.
business? And how do you get people rallied around that so they can see what's in it for them?
You mentioned mergers and acquisitions, and that's one of my favorite topics too. And I know you've been at the forefront of some of really cool both mergers and acquisition side. So talk to us about what's probably a challenging merger or an acquisition, what you've worked on, and what was so really challenging about it, and how did you actually end up overcoming that challenge?
Yeah. And the funny thing is, sadly, there's a couple. Have a lot of choices because when you do mergers and acquisitions, they all have their little challenges. Some of them
Hmm.
are gifts. Like you're
Hmm.
taking a smaller company, you're bringing in a board, and you're applying your technology to it. And even that has some, but that's a lot easier. The ones that I think that come to mind that were more complicated is when you have a challenge of time, you
Hmm.
have a challenge of the framework that the leaders are keep adjusting. So you may have someone buying your organization in a divestiture, and they say, "We changed our mind. We don't want this, but we also want you to do this for us."
Yes.
As you're executing everything else. When I was with Avery Dennett, they were in the office products division, which had
Okay.
binders and labels. They were the leader across an area that was shrinking. So if you think about it,
Hmm.
binders and labels. So we were divesting the company.
Hmm.
And first we went with one, and the second one had a challenge around time. So they
Okay.
said, we need to get this done. And then you started finding things like you were going to have in a transition, a TSA, that they didn't want that. They wanted their own. So, for example, at Avery, we had a financial system that was on Oracle. They didn't
Hmm.
have one that was for their little acquisitions. Every acquisition had its own. And they
Hmm.
basically said, in order to get this done, you need to give us a standalone ERP system for these functions. So we had
Hmm.
120 days to go and convert everything that was in Oracle and stand up a Microsoft Dynamics AX implementation, get everyone rallied around it, how to function it, and get up to speed. Now you're doing that while you're also making sure all your licenses are transferring and you work with all the
Of
vendors,
course.
as well as working with other people to make sure all your AD stuff is getting transferred. I think the challenge is you're doing all these things in your plan, but the best plan, you have to be flexible because things change. Like that timeline went from, I think it was originally like supposed to be like 270 days and went down to 120. So when you look at those things, you're like, I got to figure out how to get it done. So what's the best way? So those are challenges you have. And other ones you'll have challenge with data and systems and business processes. But it's everyone has its own personality. If you look at them, they're all almost like different people you're looking at because they all have their own
Yeah.
challenges, personalities, and fun things you have to do in each of those transformations.
Yes. I'm sure many of the listeners can connect to what you're saying, but help me understand a little bit more around the nature of mergers and acquisitions itself. What I mean by that is always the goals are aggressive. This is what I've observed.
Yeah.
Be it a divestiture, be it a merger or an acquisition or whatever it is, right? Why are the goals actually aggressive in nature? Why do we see that happening time and again?
Yeah, no, another great question. I really think a lot of that has to deal with the justification for the merger and acquisition. They're
Hmm.
seeing why we're doing this and they want to achieve those values as quickly as possible. The other part is, and I think a lot of scenarios is IT and other people aren't brought into the equation as quickly as we should be. I found that when I'm in earlier, I can be much more honest and say, okay, listen, they have no wireless network. They don't have this. That's going
Hmm.
to take time and money. So if you want to do this, you have to have this chunk of time.
Yes,
But
absolutely.
and I think sometimes we underestimate what it's going to take. So you'll look at something and then you start pulling out the covers and you'll say, hey, this is not right. But the real reason to get that is they want to achieve that value as soon as possible because they assumed a certain amount of value to come out with synergies and bringing this on board and using your current systems or using your current business processes. And they're paying a price for that. And they want that to start paying back as quickly as possible. So they want those values to be achieved. So I think that is one of the reasons why people get very excited about that. On the technology side, we're enabling some of those
Hmm.
processes.
Yes,
So they're very much on us to say, oh, I got to get this quicker. Why
yes,
don't I have my ERP system? Why can't I use this right now?
yes.
Why can't we connect the two networks? And I'm like, these two networks, they don't have security. We have to fix that first.
Yep.
So they're the things that come into mind, but they're aggressive because they want to achieve that. Sometimes they want to achieve it to get us the synergies, and then they want to go on to the next acquisition. It's kind of exciting. But yeah, again, like I said earlier, you have to be prepared and be flexible because things are going to change
Yes.
pretty.
Let's talk a little bit about the mergers and acquisition in the AI space as well. Now, for the fact that there's a lot of scrutiny or understanding of who owns the data, how does it move when the merger and acquisition happens, what kind of new aspects the leaders need to keep in mind when it really comes to, say, data segregation, data ownership, or even data administration or governance in the case of mergers and acquisitions? What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, and for data, that's always a tricky one because as you get the acquisitions together,
Hmm.
you'll have one group that has all these reports and they want it for everyone else as quickly as possible. And for us, a great example back at when I was at my last company in New Indy, they had two
Hmm.
different ERP systems. One was very easy to get the information out of. One was very difficult. So the problem is, how quickly do you find and get the data that's correct? How do you
Hmm.
map quickly enough to get in the value without getting the errors and the mess? Because that's the problem. And then a lot of times you come to an organization that may not even really know the data. And you may have these different
Hmm.
types of reports and they're apples and oranges. But the good thing with AI is I think it allows you to quickly see the data and look for those patterns. And you can
Hmm.
quickly put things together and say, okay, here, and show me how this looks like. And you can quickly see, okay, this doesn't match up or this is wrong. And I
Yes.
think that's it's a new tool that kind of gives us to do things quicker. People are talking about all these different use cases for AI. I think the
Hmm.
biggest I'm excited about is it allows us to do things quicker and the things that took a lot of iterations and checking and everything, it can do
Hmm.
for us and show you these things faster. I believe that's probably one of the powers around a merger and acquisitions is to quickly evaluate that data.
Absolutely. For the fact that we spoke about AI, I remembered the conversation, so the mention of some of the key AI and data initiatives, what you have led, and where you have used technologies like Microsoft Fabric and on Azure and building some really cool solutions. Would you talk about the key objectives and the outcomes of that initiatives for our business?
Yeah. So in the beginning, I think the initiatives at the last company I was in, New Indy, was really I need to get visibility to my data. My data was all over the place. I remember the
Hmm.
CFO coming and telling me, "Hey, we have so many systems and I can pull a balance sheet on. First, I just need to pull it together." So finance was the first driver. How do we pull that data together and other stuff? But how do we get a tool that can pull it together just to cut down the amount of time it takes to close the books and to get the visibility into the things? For us, that was the biggest one. And when I was going back in the last question, we were talking about how to make those things match up. I think that was the harder work. So that was our first part. But then after that, we started pulling operational data. We started looking at our existing reports and how they were batch operated and how some of them can break the data. And how do we
Hmm.
pull together so we'll have one version of the truth? I think that was one
Yeah.
of the bigger problems. I think everyone can relate to this. You get someone who has Excel and access to a database, and all of a sudden they're pulling different versions of the same report with slightly
Yep.
different answers. So for us, we was trying to put all it together. In Fabric, we were looking at Microsoft Azure anyway. And then
Hmm.
at that time, Fabric was coming out, and we looked at Fabric, and Fabric was a great shortcut for us to get away from all these integrations and mappings and everything. We can put it in that process first with the mappings we have now, and then pull that data together in one platform. So it
Hmm.
allowed us to quickly model, pull up reports, and see what's in the data, and then give people a platform that they can experiment with the data, but also have certain reports that are the go-to real version of the truth. So it allowed us to do
Yes.
that. And then once we had that data platform there, we can start looking at ways that AI can start answering quick questions.
Hmm.
So for us, AI was going to answer the two questions that were coming up. First of all, is how are we doing? So looking at our data and answering questions about what's our production levels, are we meeting our KPIs or downtime? And the second part, especially in manufacturing for us, was predictive analytics. So can we
Hmm.
get from preventive maintenance to predictive maintenance? And
Hmm.
that means how do I keep the machine running and find things that are about to fail? And,
Yep.
and that was a different data set. That was our OT data set. So we were looking at trying to pull these data
Yep.
points together, get some visibility, and then try to map them up to answer some really important questions for the business.
These initiatives are always challenging, right? And I think every leader has got their own set of major initiatives that actually makes them what they are. This is my favorite question to every IT leader I ask on this show. So, what is probably one of the toughest things you personally felt? Wow, you're probably amazed by the complexity of the challenge. And after that, you're like, oh, wow, I really pulled this off. What was that kind of a moment for you?
In the AI framework or any kind of transformation?
In general, if at all you're talking about your own experiences, what is that one initiative that comes to you as like standing out as an experience?
Yeah, I think for me, one of the biggest ones I went through was the one I was at Honeywell. So Honeywell was
Hmm.
doing the ERP transformation. It was global,
Okay.
and we were doing one for their exchange and rental business, and
Okay.
just mapping those business processes from a very specific system to an SAP system and trying to make sure everything worked, and then getting people globally around to test the system, making sure it worked for all their business processes. That was the biggest challenge I had for one of two reasons. One, it was mapping it to an existing system that may not have all those business processes. The second part is we had a sister project that was the repair project that was going around the same time that we had to keep
Okay.
in line. So
Okay.
for me, that was the one that I really started feeling the impacts of a global implementation with
Hmm.
people around the world with different business processes, getting people aligned, organizing training, getting the
Hmm.
business process meshed, and just keeping track of all that to make sure we were going forward. At times, I felt like we were just pushing through to get some of these answers in place. But when I
Yeah.
looked, I was just amazed with the solution that we came out with.
Yeah. With the way you're explaining, I can imagine the level of impact that would have had on the organization as well.
Yeah,
I'm
it
glad.
is.
Hmm.
And the thing is very customer facing. All of us have been on an
Yes.
airplane. When you have an
Uh-huh.
airplane on the ground, they borrow parts and they rent parts. This is the business that did it. So we had to get it right and we had to make sure it worked because
Of
otherwise
course.
you could impact all their airline customers around the world. So for me, that was in the back of my head. You talk about little things in the back of your head. You have all of this and you're like, this isn't right. Oh man.
And, and what you said is very contextual as well. People have actually seen what happens if something goes wrong at that level with, with whatever happened in the last couple of weeks. All right. Fantastic, Frederick. I loved your insights. I love the energy and I love the way how you tell these short stories. I'm sure our listeners had a great time as well listening to you. Thank you so much for being on this show. I'm really excited to bring this live to our audience. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. And when time went by so quickly, so I really appreciate the time.
Same here.